What's architecture really about? Archispeak is the show that dares to peek under the architectural kimono, exposing what architecture really is, what it is that architects really do, and show you why we are passionate about our chosen profession. I'm Neil Pan. Join Evan Troxel, Cormac Phelan, and me as we have a casual conversation about all things architecture, which includes all the stuff people don't talk about. Think you already know what architecture is really about? Tune in to find out. It's time for some Archispeak. This week I posted some images online that started getting some feedback about what's on your bookshelf, and used the hashtag Architects Library, and that turned out to be a little bit popular. Some people posted some images of their libraries, which was a lot of fun to get that sort of feedback. But where I was really going with the idea is, architecture. What sort of books do we have in our libraries, and how often do we really use them? And then also just to see, what's everybody else's libraries. So it started really with Architecture Graphic Standards, and I think I've got the 8th edition, which I bought for some unknown reason, brand new back in college. So I guess they didn't have a used one back then. But
how much did it cost?
That is a good question. I know it was over $100, and that was a lot of money.
I think that, the last time I looked at the cost of the 11th edition, the silver one, wasn't it over $200 and that's not including the disc that comes with it. They're pretty pricey. And actually, Neil, I had responded to one of your posts, and I said, I think I've got 3. Well, cleaning out my basement yesterday, I actually found a 4th. So I actually have 4 different volumes of Architectural Graphic Standards.
I was going to ask you, which is the oldest one?
I actually have a version 4, or edition, 4th edition. I have a 6th edition. I have the 8, and I have a 10. But I also have 2 Means graphic construction standards, or from Means.
Right.
Have you guys ever seen any of those? Those are actually really good construction detail manuals. I was really impressed with the amount of detail, and I've got a really old edition. I think it's probably about 13 years old, and it's still relevant today for flashing details and stuff like that. I was actually quite surprised in how many different details. I've got 2 different SMAC notebooks. It was pretty wild that once you posted that, and we were talking about graphic standards, and I did something that I've been promising my wife I would do for years now, which is clean out the basement and get it organized. I pulled all my books together, the ones that have been in boxes, and I was pretty impressed at how big it is.
Well, some of the comments I received, I posted this to several groups on LinkedIn, and I got a number of comments from other architects that had older editions, I don't know about 4th edition. Yeah, maybe some 4th editions, but several people commented how they used them, especially when doing renovation work on older buildings, and they would go back and look at how things were detailed in those older editions to use them as reference to what they were doing today on those older buildings. And I thought that was a really useful thing to do with some of those older volumes. It's kind of almost like a history book of how things might have been done, especially if you haven't torn an older building apart yet, to kind of get a clue of how maybe it might have some detailing or different aspects of the building might have been put together from the 30s or the 40s by using those as a reference.
I was recently using graphic standards in the office because I'm working on a performing arts building for a new high school, and we had 2 versions One of them is a friend of mine's personal version, and one just seems to float around the office. But there was actually some stuff in the older one that was way more applicable, with sections through theaters that were actually drawn by someone at HOK way back in the day. It even says that in the book. And when you're looking at different, seating heights as mezzanine levels curve up, and it's super cool drawings in there. There's a certain quality to them. And then just the information that's presented in those things is indispensable when it comes to lots of different kind of early design layouts. And when you're trying to figure things out, there's some really cool stuff in those. The funny thing, I'm looking on Amazon right now, and you can buy the book for $183.45, but you could rent the book for a semester for $162.50.
Oh, well, that they actually have the student versions. I mean, did you guys ever have the student versions in school?
No.
Because I actually have 2 student versions that are probably about half the size. They're paperback bound, obviously a lot cheaper, probably around like $80 or something when I bought it. But I have a student version of the 10th edition, and then I can't remember what the other one is. But it's like half the size. It's kind of a condensed. It doesn't have a lot of the notes to explain some of the details. It's just more, purely for the graphic of the details that students sort of use, don't really use. But, it's interesting when you say that, you reference back to some of these older volumes, and Evan, just like what you just said with the, you looked at the older ones to find more relevant details. When we were doing the historic project, I couldn't get my hands on enough older volumes of either Graphic Standards or just, some of these more obscure publications that showed me what your typical construction detailing was for, the late 1800s, early 1900s, because, we didn't have any existing drawings for these buildings that we're, renovating and adding on to. So, we had to do a lot of guesstimation, assuming that, we were going to have some kind of, alternate to have unforeseen conditions, and things like that. So none of these books really are irrelevant. We always need them sometime. If it's just simply to kind of see where we came from, or, how to build against one of those old buildings that the guy that was in our shoes 70, 80 years ago, what did he do? What reference manuals and materials did he use when he was drawing what we are now trying to renovate?
Speaking of graphic architectural graphic standards, one of the books that I found very interesting, and persons I found really interesting for drawing was Frank Ching. I've got several of his books, like architectural graphics, and what I find really interesting about what I need to do is go back and look at those books again. Is that what we try and do in the computer today? Is almost duplicate some of those same sort of graphic styles that Frank put in his books years ago. And I was just looking him up, by the way, and noticed that he is still active. He's on Twitter even.
Yep.
I was going to say one of the trivia things about Frank is a very popular font, that architectural looking font that Adobe produced probably almost 20 years ago now when they first generated this font. It's called Tecton. And that was actually modeled after Frank's lettering in all of his books. So a little bit of trivia for you there.
And that brings up, I can't stand it when people use architectural drafting fonts on the computer. Oh, that's a pet peeve of mine. I get it, though. I get it. Our firm used to use it in all their drawings.
Well, and I don't understand that either, because, now that we're, fully immersed into the computer age and we're drafting and doing all of our notes and everything else on the computer, just use a legible font that, explains all of your general notes and your specific notes, and just make it, easy, because sometimes, I've seen people use some pretty crazy stuff out there for their fonts. Like, yeah, it looks great, but can you read it?
Yeah. I'm actually going to be the lucky recipient of a couple of Qing books because I don't have mine anymore. And a friend of mine found some at a thrift store, and he bought them. He snapped them up for me. He's going to deliver them over a brew one day here.
That's very cool. Yeah. In fact, I actually just, I was reacquainted yesterday, digging through the basement. I was reacquainted to a lot of books that I didn't realize that I had. And I've got 3 Qing books. All of them, I bought when I was a student. So they all still have like the sticker from the university bookstore. But they're, like I was saying, they're all still relevant. You still can use them and refer to some really good details and just way that you actually present them. Because, as I say in the office, until we get to the point where we're constructing buildings from the Revit model or the BIM models, we still have to present it in a clear, concise graphic form. And without, really knowing how to put together a good set of documents that illustrates exactly what you want people to do and bid and build, you've got to refer to these books and really kind of, get it right so that you can get it built with little to no change orders or headaches.
Well, I have a question for you guys. When considering going back to architectural graphic standards, how often do you look into that book and not find what you're looking for? Because it's just not there. Silence.
You stumped me.
I stumped you guys.
Well, there has been some times where, especially with additions, like odd additions to existing buildings, where the existing conditions aren't allowing you to do exactly what it's saying in the book, that you gotta, obviously modify and twist it around just to get it to work. But for the most part, yeah, you're right. Almost everything is there, and it's constantly built off of what people were. Now we're slowly but surely getting away from the heavy timber, and how many times do we honestly, unless we are building some high end wood construction, do we ever really see the the roof deck or the floor decks made out of 3/4 inch to 1.5 inches, tongue and groove plank? So things like that, kind of are slowly leaving the lexicon of the details. But for the most part, you can find everything there.
Well, I have another. About a year or two back, I was actually on the beta program for the not online, but a disc-based version of architectural graphic standards, and it's really cool. And you can search and such like that. But maybe I'm a little old school on this, but I find grabbing a reference book like that and actually being able to flip through the pages to find something is far more useful to me than trying to search through the disc-based version. What are your guys' thoughts on it? Have you ever used that?
I think I was part of that too, and I have those discs and I never use them.
I wasn't, but I've seen, in fact, my volume 10, my 10th edition had a disc that came with it. I think it's still sitting in the cover and it's never come out. But if you look at my 10th edition, it is tabbed to the hilt with little sticky notes and all that other stuff just hanging out of the spine of it to of everything. And I've got like little notes hanging out of it that says wood frame construction, blah blah blah, whatever detail that I'm looking for. So I can look at the little tab, pull it open, and start looking at what I really need. And to me, I like the more tactile thing. Plus, in a way, I also like the fact that I see it there, it's drawn, but now I have to draw it. So now I have to learn how to actually detail, this picture and have it detailed properly to my application.
Yeah, and it raises your level of understanding because you're adapting it, right? I mean, you're not taking it exactly how it is because, that theater that they drew in there was poured in place concrete, and now you're doing a steel frame or something, and you do have to do some adaptation.
Exactly. And I think what that does is as you start to learn about the way that you're detailing it, then, and Evan, I know you can definitely speak to this, but all of us can, now you learn that, when you're designing something, you're not designing in a bubble of, it's just a bunch of lines and somebody else is going to figure out how to detail that. No, now you can actually consciously design, thinking about, okay, my floor to floor height is 12 feet. I know that from that 12 foot, second floor elevation, below that, I've got X amount of deck, I've got blah, and, I've got all of this different structure. So now you can actually start to think about what it is, how all of that structure of that, the detail that you've now learned how to draw translates to the exterior facade, and just it starts to inform and educate your designs so that you're not having to completely redesign something because the design that somebody else who didn't know the detailing, so you don't have to completely redesign it and say, that didn't work. I know the client likes this and signed off on it, but we've got to give them something completely different. Which we had an example of that at one of my older firms that I worked for. Is we had a designer who, great designer, can draw a really pretty picture, but didn't know the detailing, and we couldn't make the elevations work the way he wanted them to. And it was such an argument back and forth trying to explain to him. It's like, look, you want, these floor to, this double height space and all of this glass and all of this other stuff, but where are you putting the structure? Well, you can figure that out.
Yeah, this might derail things a little bit. What you're bringing up here as far as the architectural library goes, but I think that this is a great topic to talk about. So maybe we just jump off here for a second. And it really comes down to, this comment came up this week in my office, and it was, why do we call everybody who gets hired a designer? Because that's kind of our entry-level position. If you want to have a title, that's it. Everybody who comes into the firm is a designer. And I think that there's quite a few firms that do it this way. And so, my thinking behind this is that it sounds a little bit pretentious, right? Everybody's a designer. But I would say that, you're talking about the guy who's the designer with the capital D, kind of going back to episode 1 where we touched on this a little bit, where, you can draw a pretty picture, but they can't figure anything out. That is a designer, and that person is not probably an architect, if you get deep into the meanings of these words.
Sure.
But when an intern comes in and they're a designer, what I like to think is that starts to program them to be thinking like a designer no matter what path they take in their career, because everybody who touches these projects should be designing. And we have people who do production work, we have people who do project management work, and we have people who do design work. And there's kind of these separate tracks that people take, but every single one of them has to be designing on these projects in some capacity. And I think that gets lost for a lot of people. They think, I'm just drawing toilet details. I'm just drawing, it doesn't matter what it is. I'm just drawing footings. But if you're applying yourself and you're not simply just becoming someone who works on an assembly line who is just drawing and picking up red marks and brainlessly toiling away at a set of working drawings, you should be putting thought and solving problems, and that's what designers are, is they're problem solvers. And everybody who touches these projects should be attempting to solve problems and make it a better project however they can. Whether they get, the respect for that or not, it makes a better product. And you're able at the end to say, okay, I was given this, but this is how I applied it, and this is how I figured it out, and this is how I took it to the level where this is going to work so much better for the client. And I think that a lot of people lose sight of that when they're working on these projects because they're not the person putting down the first lines on the paper. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I was actually talking about this with people in the office about kind of it almost harkens to like what type of delivery method that a particular firm does, whether it's the assembly line type firm that you've got the designer hands it off to the the people who essentially take it into design development and construction documents, and then you've got them kind of segmented with a project manager, a project architect, or senior project architect, and then several project architects that are kind of just working on the thing, and then you hand that off to somebody who's a construction administrator, and no one person, it kind of pulls that consistency away from the project, that kind of loses focus, and to me kind of hinders the whole process, because if you don't have, let me just explain that I've since the day one of, even before graduating, I've worked in firms that are all the project manager on the project is typically, he's the designer and the construction administrator. He does the whole gamut of things. And there are people who work with him on it that eventually will drop off and go on to another project. But we always, we've always had that project manager that is the consistent and constant all the way through. And when, I've taken over a project where, I'm like the new hire, and it's like, all right, when you're now the project manager on this, and you're going to be, it's in 10% construction. I'm sitting in a meeting, haven't really fully immersed myself with what's going on with the project, and people are telling me, this was a design problem, this was a design problem, and then they're looking at me like, why did you design it that way? Like, well, I really didn't design it, but, you can't use those excuses. So, you start to, when you chop up a project, and I don't know if it's exactly what you're talking about, Evan, but when you chop up a project and you kind of make it more of an assembly line process where you have a designer and then it goes on to the next phase, people start losing interest in,
ownership.
In ownership, exactly. Yeah. And, so the project tends to fail.
I think that approach is detrimental to most projects, where you don't have a person who had that big idea when they drop off the project and they aren't able to carry it through to the end. Not only is that person doing a disservice to themselves because they're not having to figure out all of those things as they go along, or at least be involved, but they're also handing that off, like you said, and those ideas don't translate down to people who don't own the project as much as that person. And as much as they have to be a leader, they have to be the cheerleader all the way through that project to get that design intent all the way to the end, because that's what's most important to the client. Usually these responses in design are direct responses to problems that the clients told them that they have. And if those things get lost, that's when you start to deliver a project to the end that doesn't fulfill the goals of the project.
I've actually worked at several firms, and I've experienced both. And I really started my career in a small office, and so everybody was involved. There's 2 or 3 people. You don't really necessarily have a project manager, but I mean, everybody works on the team to get a project completed. And so there's a lot of collaboration. And I've also worked, in a larger firm where it was more what I called project manager driven. And so you did have that sort of team leader that would meet with the clients and then, run the production all the way through into construction. And at one point, I worked for a firm that was really segregated, and you had, say the designers, and they would meet with the clients early on, do a design package, and then it would kind of just get passed off to a production team, and then the production team would take over, and there'd be some communication, obviously, with the client after that point. But the designers, and part of it was, the firm was, the main office was in Southern California. The satellite office was in Northern California, where I worked out of. And so we had that distance thing going on. And
that's
so
really hard.
The designers were all down south, and they would pass it off to you, because these were Northern California projects. And, so you would just pick it up, and you really had no idea why certain things were done a certain way. Details that were kind of, okay, well, here's a detail package, but sometimes the details worked, sometimes maybe they didn't, or there were changes. And then you didn't have that maybe institutional knowledge, if you will, of a project. And so as I was on the production side, it was tough. But what I found interesting was, when I worked with the firm that was more project manager driven, one of our complaints was that the designers wouldn't detail out a project very well. And so we would often complain, like, okay, well, we're not getting the information we need from the designers. And, it would be nice if we could collaborate with them a little bit during the production part. So that helped. But we often complain, okay, it'd be nice to have this set of details maybe coming from them. And then when I did work in an environment where we were getting that, but because it was so segregated, and the designers were like, okay, we're up, don't talk to us. It's pushed down to production now. We don't care about the project. Don't call us. We'll call you, sort of attitude. And I didn't like that. I didn't work for that firm for very long, actually, because I just didn't like that collaborative process, or the lack of collaborative process. And that brings me, even to recently, I started consulting with a firm on a temporary basis to help them get a project completed. And so I'm working in a small office right now of like 4 people or something. And, I was drawing sections through this existing commercial building, and we got through this elevator tower, and it literally, the collaboration was fantastic, because I was working back and forth with another guy, and then also one of the principals of the firm. And as I was drawing things, I was like, okay, well, how does this work, guys? What was your thinking? And then we'd talk about it, and I'd draw a part, and then we'd literally stand around the computer and work back and forth, between different pieces of the building to try and figure out how it works. And that's a really fun process. I mean, it's painful sometimes, because you feel like you should know how something works, but sometimes you don't, or you don't have enough information. And so that collaborative process is a lot of fun. And I find that a real learning experience, where, when you do work for a firm where everything's separated and you can't talk to the designers, or, you're not supposed to, that's not fun.
I have to say that, the team members that I like to work with the most are the ones who aren't afraid to pick up the phone or stick their head up and come over and talk to you about that. Because, when you are early on in the design stage, you can't think of everything. And number one, the deadlines are what they are, and you've got to move things along, and you've got to work things out later. That's what those other phases of the project are for. I love it when somebody is not afraid to pick up the phone. There's 2 scenarios. There's the one where you send out the stuff, and then the people say, grumble, grumble, grumble. Look what this idiot did here, and ha ha ha, look what he did here. What was he thinking here? And then there's the other people who immediately pick up the phone and say, okay, I see some potential issues with this, this, and this. Let's work through them. And those are the collaborative efforts that you're talking about, Neil. And that is when I really feel like people are doing architecture. Yeah. They're not treating it as a handoff. They're treating it, number one, the designer expects things to come back to them. And the people who are doing production are also saying, I am going to get exactly what I need from this person because they owe it to me. And that's a cool process to go through. I think that those are the most successful working environments that we can ask for sometimes, is when there is a handoff, when that is that either the type of firm you're working at, or whether it's the type of project because of the schedule or whatever. You've got to bring in new team members who are seeing it for the first time, and man, sometimes that really sucks too. But they've got to get up to speed, and the best thing that they can do is say, let's go to lunch, let's talk about this, let's have a meeting, let's talk through this, and let's work on this together. And the solutions that come up are usually much better. Because I'm also seeing it from the other end, man. You see some people, you have a design intent, you even draw a detail, and then somebody does it completely differently than what you wanted, and and then it's like you really feel like they dropped the ball. They never let you know it was an issue. They solved it some other way that was completely foreign to the intent, and it's like that was a huge missed opportunity.
Yeah, that's never a good thing. But Cormac, something you said earlier about your graphic standards book, how it's all tabbed up. That just reminded me when I pulled mine out to take that photo that I posted last week, that my book was also all tabbed up, and I didn't even remember that it was. So that shows you how long it's been since I've looked at it. But one of the things I'd really be curious, because we had talked briefly about the digital versions, however that's done, whether it's on a disc or online, is I'd really like to get some feedback from, say, maybe some of our student listeners or those that are in architecture school now or just out of school, how they feel about these digital versions of these books. And maybe they don't even use them. Or maybe they don't even use the architectural graphic standards or any of these other types of books at all. So, but maybe this more computer generation is used to that, and they're okay with that. But I'd appreciate some feedback on that from people, because I think that would be enlightening to me.
Well, speaking of enlightening, so when we started talking about the whole library thing, and this kind of ties into what, our kind of sidebar about collaboration and project delivery and the design and how it's carried out all the way through, most all of my books that I have, I use as reference material, whether it's looking for, specific design, not really design inspiration, is, ooh, look, I'm going to do that one. But, it's just like how people have looked at a, design solution, a design challenge, and how they've solved it, and, get inspiration from that. But I've always used all of my books, clearly, we buy them. A lot of times we buy them for the pretty pictures, but ultimately I'm using them as reference material. And I ask this question a lot in the office, mainly from all of the new guys that are coming in, the recent graduates and stuff. I'm like, well, tell me about your architecture library. And I have people, and it shocks me. Okay, so I've got, I don't know, it seems, I didn't count yesterday, but it's, between 300 and 500, books on my shelf of, and this is just purely architecture books, not history books and art books and drawing books and all of the other things. I literally have about 300 to 500 architecturally related books, and so it doesn't seem to register when somebody says, "Well, I've got like 3 books," or "I've got no books." And I'm just, well, why don't you have any books? And most of them are like, well, we can find everything online. And like,
these are the same architects who don't have scales.
Yeah.
they draw everything on the computer.
Yeah, it's just, I had one of those in school, but, we don't really need them now. It's like, what do you mean you don't need them? Because when we were trying to generate topics or, what we were going to talk about, one of them that I want to eventually talk about and get to is, sketching tool for architects and things like that. But, it's just things that we grew up with doing, just as second nature as, architects and designers. It just doesn't seem to be the same thing anymore. And when I was asking, well, how do you, find reference? I'm like, well, we just flip through the variety of different architectural websites, whether it be, the Architect's Newspaper or ArchDaily or Architizer or all these different ones. I'm like, well, that's great, but how do you keep track of them? How do you tab them? How do you store them? I mean, if you want to reference back to something. I've got this like little mental Rolodex, and it's like, well, I'm looking for a corner window condition where the beam above, cantilevers out, and so they say, HOK or SOM, they did a project like this. Let me show you what they did, and so you can kind of see examples of what you're trying to do and see how they solved it.
Well,
go ahead. Oh, I was gonna say, so I've got all of these like books tabbed and stacked, and it's just I almost even have them stacked as like here's going to be my the stuff for the materials, and here's this and here's that. It just kind of baffles me that where is the architect's library today versus us old timers that wanted to like feel the pages flip between our hands when we're trying to do and look for something. And it's interesting to kind of to see where what Evan, you work in a larger a larger office than 5. I work in an office of 20, and I've asked the question at least 5, 6, 7 times with all of the new hires that come in or people that I work with, and it's always usually the same. I mean, it's this diminishing library, it's the diminishing quantity of stuff on their shelves. You say, oh, we don't need shelves.
Yeah.
We got it all on the computer.
Yeah, and I do have some architectural books, reference books like we're talking about, on my iPad. I do like to carry those around with me and not have them the physical books in my bag. But I do have physical copies of the same books on my bookshelf. Like the Architect's Portable Handbook is a great kind of field guide to things. Yes. And, I've got one of those on my bookshelf, but I also have it in PDF form on my iPad. And so I think there's a value to that sometimes, but what you're talking about with it not above and beyond the tactile feel of the pages and being able to skim through these things, but it is a tool of the profession. And I think one of the first parts to being a professional is having the tools, It's like dress for success, right? It's the same thing. You've got to have a set of scales. You've got to have a couple triangles, because there are things that we do on paper no matter what. And this is another topic for another episode, but there's a huge value in sketching. And, I'm all the time, even when I'm just talking to my wife about something, I will have a pencil in my hand and I will draw it, and she'll get frustrated and say, just tell me. And I say, I can't. I don't know how. I've got to draw this to explain it correctly. And I think that, that's part of our language of how we talk. And it's so amazing how fast you can come to solutions when you actually are just drawing and using a circle template and using a scale and using a rolling ruler to figure something out quickly. Those tools, along with these books on our shelves, are huge time savers. You're not going to spend time in Google and Amazon and searching for the book and trying to find somebody who's scanned it in. It's right there on your shelf. And the thing about my office, it's a little weird, is we don't have a proper architectural library. I know that the office used to, but when they moved offices, I think, I don't know what happened to all those books. It seems like everybody kind of has their personal collection now. And so you kind of have to know who has what in the office. And it's kind of a cool little networking tool to go around and say, okay, here's what's on my library. If you ever need anything, feel free to borrow it. I want to know what's on your library. And that's kind of a fun thing to do, I think.
I used to bring my books in, and I've got a small portion of like books that I really, more eye candy books that I kind of keep at my desk. And I posted a picture of one of kind of like the ones that are right in eye shot of me that hover over the screen of my computer. But I've had too many books walk away.
Yeah, that happens.
That I've, because I'm, I use these so much and I'm protective of my books. I stopped bringing them in, or the ones that I know I have in the office, I keep, I got them on LoJack. No, I know exactly. I was like, I know that you did not buy that book. Why? Because look at that little, cryptic initials, in that corner right there. That's mine.
Yeah.
And I don't want to, yeah.
I've got this friend of mine who's a lighting consultant, and he's an older guy. He's so fun to talk to. Every time he comes into the office, he brings me a new stack of books to look at, because his architectural library is thousands of books.
Wow.
And so everyone's got a big sticker on the front page that says, this is my book. And he knows the next time he comes in, I'm going to give him those books back, and he's going to give me another stack. And it is so much fun to go through these books. And he's got, an amazing collection. He's like, I thought you'd like something in this one, and so he kind of points out a few things that he thinks are of interest, and then he just leaves them, and he comes back a couple months later and swaps them out for a new stack, and that's a pretty cool thing.
One of the things it sounds like we all need to do is kind of rediscover our libraries. Cormac, you said you cleaned out the basement and you found a whole bunch that you'd forgotten you had, and certainly I was standing around in our library and in my house here and just looking around, and that's really kind of what prompted this was, wow, I really do have a lot of books here, and architecture books, and we have a lot of other types of books, and maybe we'll touch on that in a moment, but it's like, wow, I think I need to rediscover this, because there's a wealth of information here that maybe I can find using Google, and there definitely are some times, and I don't want to discredit searching for things online, because we often use that in this office I'm working in right now.
Yeah. It's amazing.
How literally you can type something, a short phrase, and bam, you have the information. It's right in front of you. Or you can click on the image link and suddenly you've got flashing details or other types of things that you might be searching for. And it just comes up so fast. And sometimes, so I guess maybe what we're trying to say is that, use the right tool sometimes. And maybe searching online is that right tool for something. And maybe if it doesn't come up in 0.025 seconds, then you go grab it off your shelf.
Yeah, I'm a huge proponent of using the right tool for the job. I mean, that's a big deal.
Oh yeah,
I mean, you're right.
The one thing that's kind of disappeared from every architecture's office, but it hasn't disappeared at all, is the good old Suites catalogs.
Oh, yeah.
But I'll tell you what, I am, if not on the Suites.com website at least once a week, it's probably a lot more,
And there's an app. I think they've got an app, too.
And there is an app for that.
Yep, they now have an app. We actually, I think all three of us probably are friends with, and God, I will find her, but she works for Suites. She works for McGraw-Hill, I believe, or Suite, whoever puts out Suites, and is always talking about the Suites catalog and the Suite apps on Twitter, and I mean, they used to go. They went from being a valuable tool to find the latest and greatest products to put into your specifications to then just something to hold down your models when you're gluing them down, and gluing down all the the topos and all that other stuff is how we used to use them, because they were the heaviest thing in the office. To pretty much just
the huge green wall.
Exactly, and then they just kind of disappeared one day. But
it makes a lot of sense for that kind of thing to actually disappear and go digital.
It does. And, I find that I use that, and I use the arcat.com as well. I don't know if you guys have ever used that. Yeah. But Arcat's basically it's a type of Suites thing where you can go into per division of the specifications and click on, I'm looking for, I don't know, transition strips. Click on transition strips, and that division that you can pull down details, spec sections for it, all the things that you need, which make it great for being able to not only pull down the detail, but also make sure that your specs have exactly what you're drawing and detailing. So they kind of do the same. You got a set of documents that are working together.
It sounds like what may be changing in offices over the last 10 to 20 plus years is that the reference material or like things like graphic standards or our architectural books, several of which we've mentioned and many we haven't, but the catalogs are disappearing from a lot of offices.
All the
stuff product
updates
catalogs
so quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was always one of the challenges. I know one firm I worked with even at one point hired a third-party firm that essentially would just update our library of product catalogs all the time. And I think those are the things that are probably disappearing and being replaced by that information being available on the internet and easily accessible to the specifications and copy and paste into your own specs.
Yeah.
That sort of, maybe that's the part of the architectural library for an office that's disappearing, where, what we're talking about today is that the rich reference material and just graphically represented books, or just books on the architectural history or buildings or architects or cities. That sort of information is still in our libraries.
Yeah, a couple more books that I thought about. I'm studying for my exams right now, and one of the things that keeps coming up in the ones that is Kevin Lynch's Image of the City.
Ah, yes.
And so, the other day I'm looking through my library, and there it is. It's right there. I didn't even remember that I had it. And what's funny is that book's going to get a heck of a lot of use now, because I'm probably the only one in the office who has it. And so there's a bunch of people studying for their exams, and they're gonna want to read that.
I actually have that book hovering right over my head. I think it's sitting right next to the Architecture of Los Angeles.
Nice.
Because I can see like my little books, and it's the getting around, or I can't, the Rybczynski book. God, I can never pronounce it.
Oh yeah, the guidebook.
Yeah. No, it's I'm not even going to try to pronounce this guy's name because I butcher it every time I say it. But Witold Rybczynski. Go ahead, everybody who's going to comment. Yes, I did butcher his name, but he's got a great series of books about, looking around and things like, in fact, Looking Around, I believe, is one of the titles. But I mean, it's just this great series of books that, talk about the experience of architecture. If you guys haven't seen them, it's just a great read, because, and I'll try to find a link to his work, and probably even the pronunciation of his name. But it's just a great series of books that kind of remind me of a more readable version of like Pattern Language, where Pattern Language is more of a academic type book.
I love that book.
It's a fantastic book.
I've got a copy of that.
I remember all the way, that was one of my biggest reference books, both in when I was working commercial, residential, doing new urbanist communities, working with new urbanist communities. I loved pulling it out because it just talked about the flavor of like all of these little nuances that we just take for granted in architecture, and I think actually that's one of the things that I love about my book collection, is that not all the time will I ever actually get to design like an English garden or something like that, but through my books I will be able to experience some of these great spaces, and maybe I get the opportunity to, but now I have all these different reference books that kind of let me know that there are other people out there that have done it, and that I don't have to reinvent the wheel to do something. I just have to look, and as you said, Evan, it's finding the right tools for the job.
I was going to mention, you talked about not reinventing the wheel there. One of the other books that was on my shelf that came up the other day was a book called American House Styles. And that was, I love thumbing through that sometimes, because as working in residential, especially in Northern California where I live, there's a lot of homes that were built in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and so on that really have no style per se. And it does help to go back and look at that book, and especially if you're doing a remodel and the client wants a particular style, you can pull that out and really examine the details and the parts that make up a particular style, and really pull from that to kind of adapt '70s, ranch house into something that, it's not. But you can create something. You can use that as a reference to make a better house out of it. So I really enjoy that book as well.
And we should probably mention, to all of our listeners who are listening along, writing these books down if they don't have them or they're not familiar with them. And then, we've got the other listeners who are like, yep. Oh, you guys should be talking about this one. You should be talking about this one too. And we'll hopefully get those in the comments. But we'll provide links in our show notes to all these books, at least the ones that are available, and probably through Amazon or whatever on the website. And you guys can go to archispeakpodcast.com and click on the episodes link, and the latest episode will be right at the top of that page.
Something else I think, beyond just architecture books, I'm sure many of us have other books on our shelves too. And I'd be curious what other types of things you guys have on your shelves. And
well, let me ask this, Neil, because I've been actually wanting to ask this to you specifically. All right, you live in a household with two architects, your wife and you, and you guys, you're residential and your wife is commercial. I'd be interested to know what your libraries are like. Do you have similar interest in monographs and things like that, or do you have completely differing volumes of stuff? And it would be really interesting, because now it's Evan, your books are kind of more of to your sensibilities of your design tastes and things like that, probably, and I know mine are, but now you have two. I don't know if you guys share the same similar style sensibilities or likes or things, but I'd be interested to kind of know what your library is like. Sure.
I didn't have as many architecture books. It was more of a monetary thing. I just really couldn't afford to have some of these really nice books. And so I had, a somewhat decent sized library, nothing like yours, Cormac. But when I got married, my wife's library dwarfed mine. And she's got books that I've never heard of, or just all kinds of things, and just an amazing library. And so it makes my library now look fantastic. But what's interesting about that is we do have a few, not a lot, but we do have a few duplicates, just from our college days, having the same books. But she has a much, much wider variety of books and cities, and just books about cities, books about architects and history, and just an amazing collection of books. And then in addition to that, she's got an incredible nonfiction library and fiction library of Hollywood history and Stephen King and other nonfiction books that just boggle my mind. I actually, when we redesigned our house and built a new house, essentially, one of the design challenges that I looked around and I went, wow, we have a lot of books. And my dining room at the time was really a 2 feet or so, 2 to 3 feet wider than it needed to be. And so what I did was I actually built in a series of shelves on each side. So our dining room is essentially also doubles as a library. And I think I counted it up. I have over 100, almost 130 lineal feet of shelving space just in our dining room. And almost virtually every shelf is full, front to back. It's like, okay, we can't buy any more books and now since we have a family, we don't buy as many books, but it's pretty full, actually. And it's a great collection. It's one that we don't probably get to look at or read and enjoy as much now with 2 small kids at home, but it certainly is a great library, and it's a combination of everything. And to really kind of answer your question about do we have similar styles? I think we actually do. In fact, a funny sidebar, when we recently was Valentine's Day, and so we each gave each other cards, and when we opened them up, we started laughing because we didn't buy the exact same card, because obviously, husband and wife, different cards, but the image on the front was almost identical. It was like a couple walking down a street in kind of a vignetted view, and each card had that on there, and actually several phrases of the text inside the cards was identical. And I was like, wow, I guess we really were meant for each other, because we're buying each other similar Valentine cards. So our styles do kind of mesh, and that works out well, not only in our marriage, but in our architectural background too. That does work out pretty well.
Well, where I got most of my books from was like the Columbia DVD collection type thing. It was, and I'm trying to look online to see if I can find the actual link to it, but it was basically an architects and engineers book club type thing where you buy, you get like 6 books at a discounted rate, and then you have to buy one at the full rate kind of thing. And I swear, it probably drove my wife crazy, but you got another, you got a new book, and just had this like long stack of books, and it was kind of fun to get, every 2 weeks I would have a new book in there. It was almost like my, a birthday for me.
That's awesome. I've got all my architecture books at the office. And both my wife and I don't read any fiction, really. So around here, mostly what's next to my bed or in my office is stuff that's... I'm a huge fan of Seth Godin. His books are all amazing, and there's a couple of other... one that I recently finished that was really good. It's called Design as a Job. And that's by Mike Montero, who's on Twitter as Mike_FTW. And he wrote a really great book about just how to be a designer, what it takes to be a designer, how you always have to be selling your projects and convincing people why you're the guy for the job or the woman for the job. And I think it's one of those. It's a short book, and it is an amazingly concise read of what it takes to be a designer today. And his particular area of expertise is web design, but it totally transcends graphic design, architectural design. Anybody who is in front of clients and doing client services, it's one of those kind of no-brainer. You got to read this because there's so much great stuff in there.
I have that book as well, and it is an excellent read. And then, of course, if you're the not safe for work version of his video, he did a talk. And it was posted online, and we'll have to put a link in there for that as well, because it's pretty epic, and it's really fantastic for everybody who works in our profession as well as web design or just in graphic arts and working as a consultant. So it's an excellent video to watch. It's like 45 minutes or something, but it's certainly put your headphones on and don't be offended by the F word.
Yeah.
So
it is a great video.
All right, so we're saying that we don't really buy very many books recently, but what's the latest book that you guys have purchased? It doesn't matter. It could even be, Diary of a Wimpy Kid.
Okay, mine is. Actually, I have 2 that I've gotten really recently, and one of them is architectural. One of them is the 25th edition of the Case Study Houses.
Yes, beautiful book.
And that is an amazing book.
Yes.
It's a great coffee table book.
I have book,
and I'll put a link to that one in the show notes because it's just one I think everybody should have. And then the other one is, and I'm looking for it right now, but it's a book on all the Pixar movies, and has all of the storyboards for all of their movies, and they're all done in completely different styles because they're all different artists, And so it's just a picture book, and every page has thumbnails and upon thumbnails of frames of these movies before they were put into the computer.
It's awesome. Great. What about you, Neil?
Well, actually, it's a couple of books I got for Christmas, and really one is about the history of Marvel Comics, actually. And then another one I got was on the art of Greg Horn, who's a comic book illustrator, and so those are the two books that I've gotten recently, and I haven't actually cracked them yet because I have my other obsession, which I have is reading actually comic books, and from Marvel and DC and some of the independents. So I tend to those, I don't know if you can really call those books, but I mean I do read them, and as we'll probably discover in future episodes on this podcast, I do have a rather large collection of comics, and have read most of them over the years, and so every Wednesday, and Cormac, you and I go back and forth about what we're getting every Wednesday or so, and in fact, I need to get out there this weekend if I can. But so those are kind of the books that I'm reading, and actually, if you the most recent ones that I would almost would recommend would be the and I know we'll probably maybe get some comments from people on this, but the Before Watchmen series of books from DC have I've read. Two of the miniseries have completed, and I've actually, because I was so far behind on my reading, that I've just kind of waited now, and I'm reading each of the individual issues as a group now, almost like picking up the graphic novel of it. But I'm reading those, and I have to say that they're quite excellent. The few that I've read so far.
Well, I would say that almost all of mine come from my Wednesday venture to the local comic book shops. I got most recently turned on to a series, an independent series called Bedlam. And it was more because of the kind of like really sketchy, it's very not PG-13. It's whatever the R rating in comic books are.
Very not PG-13.
Yes. It's just the artist it's just fantastic artwork. It's kind of a very sketchy style, which, as at least you two know and a few more people know, I do my little, daily sketch on a Post-it note and, post it online. And so, anything about, new artists and sketching and stuff like that, I, tend to buy. And now that I'm kind of venturing forward in actually putting the sketching to practice and trying to write a comic book or, illustrate, it's a joint venture between me and a buddy of mine. I've picked up a lot of how-to books on, like how to, practice figure drawing for graphic novels and sketching and shadowing and all this other stuff to kind of, I draw all the time, but I've never actually followed anybody's rules. And
do you have a favorite artist?
Honestly, when it comes right down to it, I think I've always been enamored with, and it's because of my affinity with Spawn. I really like McFarlane. Todd McFarlane's just a fantastic artist. But I mean, there's so many more, and there's more that I wish I knew their names because there's some of the newer artists. I mean, there's your classic artists, the Ditkos and things like that are just they're the staple of the golden age of comics and stuff like that. But when you really get down to it, like Delgado's doing the new Superior Spider-Man. I think he's either the pen or the colors, but just all of his work is just fantastic. But I've always been amazed at the technical, just everything technically amazed by Todd McFarlane's work. I don't know I don't know what you think about him, Neil, because he's kind of had his hand in a couple of Batman series and Spider-Man when he was working with Marvel before they started Image Comics and stuff like that. But I don't know. I mean,
what I can say about Todd's work, McFarlane's work, is it defined Spider-Man for an entire generation. Yeah. And so it was an epic. His illustration style and his ability was just fantastic at the time, and he doesn't draw so much anymore. But when he was doing Spider-Man, he really defined Spider-Man for over a decade, and even his influence is still exists today with Spider-Man. And as a character, mostly Spider-Man, and so he's essential to that character, and to his work is amazing. It's too bad actually that he doesn't illustrate as much anymore, because he was fantastic.
Too busy running the empire.
I guess so. The artist. If I can butt in on answering that question too, that really defined an era for me was John Byrne. And his run on the Fantastic Four in the early to mid 80s, just next to Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, who obviously created, well, maybe not so obvious to everybody, but they created the Fantastic Four and defined them with one of the longest runs in comic book history on a single title, which actually stood until just a few years ago, when it was broken by a writer and an artist on Ultimate Spider-Man. And next to their efforts that spanned almost a decade on that title, John Byrne really defined the Fantastic Four in the early 80s, and then eventually moved on to Superman, and then spun off from there. But for me, traditional comic book illustration, and actually before he was on Fantastic Four, he defined the original X-Men. Well, not the original, but the new X-Men in the middle 70s with Chris Claremont as the writer. But for me, that he really defined what comic book art was for me, because that was more my generation that I grew up in. I didn't grow up, reading Stan and Jack's version of the Fantastic Four. That probably was a little just before my time. But going back, I can certainly appreciate what they did. But John Byrne definitely defined that style for me, and actually almost turned me off from a lot of art style that came later, where people started really branching off and doing different styles for comic books. And it really wasn't until the late 90s and maybe early 2000s where I started to kind of branch out and appreciate other styles of comic book art. And that, of course, has continued to grow. And I have a great appreciation for a number of different artists today that I wouldn't have had before.
I'm assuming that the Hellboy style of artwork probably makes your head blow up.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of his work, actually. And actually, he was just Mike, and I'm going to butcher his name. Mike Mengele, I believe is how it's pronounced. I'm not sure, but he was just at an artist signing here in the Bay Area at a comic book shop locally this weekend. So yeah, and I didn't know about it. I'm kind of disappointed. I would have taken my son to meet him, because my son does a lot of drawings, and he enjoys going to meet the different artists at the comic book shops.
All right, so of course you guys can follow us on Twitter at Archispeak, ARCHISPK, and we are at archispeakpodcast.com, and you can find us on there and all of our Twitter stuff. I'm at eTroxel, ETROXEL, and also real quick, please continue with the comments and ratings on iTunes. Those help a lot, and then the comments for our shows, you can leave those on the website as well.
And I'm NPANN on Twitter.
And I'm Archetype. It's ARCHY_TYPE on Twitter as well, and also on Instagram. So you can see all those crazy little sketches I do every day.
I joined the choir to sing. They're all competing for some other thing. I joined the choir to sing. I joined the choir to sing. They're all competing for some other thing. I joined the choir to sing.
Hey, so those sketches.
Yes.
Do you really limit yourself to 2 minutes?
No. In fact, actually, that's actually the most common question.
All right, I want my money back.
Oh, no, no. You haven't bought anything. No, no.
Not yet.
So here's actually how it started. It was originally, if you go back to, and I've got a Flickr page where I've got all of the sketches that I've done daily since October 26th of last year is when I started this. Sorry, August 26th of last year. And if you look at those, yeah, you're going to say, oh, yeah, those are definitely, 2-minute sketches, just real rough, real quick. And as they started to evolve and people were like, trying to give me, challenges and ideas of things to sketch and draw and stuff, it became a lot more complicated, to try to get, all of this detail and stuff on a 3x3 Post-it note.
Yeah.
But I will say that I stay true to the 2-minute sketch when I sketch it all out and I lay it all out. I get that done with pencil really quickly, and then I start the inking and marker process of just kind of like laying down whether it's the color or just the black ink and all that other stuff. And rarely do I spend anything more than 20 minutes on a sketch. The reason I keep the 2-minute sketch hashtag going is because there are so many people that have been following me, on Instagram, like from day one, and they have like bookmarked 2-minute sketch, that hashtag, so that they can find my daily work, which I think is absolutely amazing. I've got a boatload of followers and get a lot of great comments and a lot of like positive feedback because. There was a time when I would never show anybody any of my work, and then I started to, do these postings and, got positive feedback, and I felt like, maybe I'm, reasonably decent at this. Nice. And then literally I got a comment one day that said that, this one girl, it's almost like picking up the daily newspaper for her. She gets her coffee and she goes and looks for my sketch. And
wow.
I was like, wow, that's great. I was like, I don't know if I deserve that, but I thought it was amazing that, she, part of her daily ritual is looking at my sketches. And I'm like, wow. So no, I don't, there are some times where I will, post a true 2-minute sketch. And sometimes I'll actually say true 2-minute sketch on there, just, and you can tell the quality, difference between them. Some are like really highly sketchy, and with just like a little bit of splash of color or a marker on it. But otherwise, it really, let's just call it, what it really is. It's a 20-minute sketch, I kind of feel bad every time I put the hashtag on there. That
you're just keeping the dream alive. There, you're keeping the flow going by doing that.
Yeah. I'm not purposely, because seriously, there's been people who've actually like been quite like, that is not a 2-minute sketch. There's no way that's a 2-minute sketch. I'm like, you're correct. Right, it's not. And it's just like, and if you actually look at my Flickr, the Flickr posting or Flickr page that I've got, not Flickr page, Flickr page. Sorry, I tried to start a Tumblr page, but honestly, I can't keep up with all of these different pages and stuff and try to stay sane at the same time. But if you look at the Flickr page, I have a little comment off to the side, that says that though these did start off as a 2-minute sketch, full disclosure here, so don't come and, try to like yell at me just because it really isn't a 2-minute sketch.
That's a really impressive gallery, by the way. That's awesome.
I'm waiting for the coffee table book myself.
I've actually had so many people ask me, well, what are you going to do with these? Because as of right now, they're just sitting in either my, in a variety of different sketchbooks, just, sandwiched together with the date written underneath them. And I just recently picked up the Sketch a Day book. And it's got like a little slot for each, a sketch every day. And so really all I do is just write in the date and I stick my Post-it note on that. And it's a lot easier to kind of keep track of where everything is. But, they've got so many Post-it notes floating around this house. I really don't know what to do with them. And I'm pretty sure my wife wants me to do something with them.
And I like how all of the photos have one of your instruments of choice in there with it. You've got some kind of a pen or a micron or whatever.
I had started the whole thing off, and actually this is probably why it was the 2-minute sketch. I started everything off drawing with my old, it's got to be like 80 years old fountain pen. And it's a great thing, but the problem was that I was drawing so much with it, and it probably hadn't had that the nib started to bend a little bit. And I didn't want to do any more damage to it because I can't get that replaced. I mean, I could probably get it fixed, but I can't get it replaced. So I stopped drawing with that. But I had always, just because I, was using the hashtag, sketch with fountain pen and, crazy crap like that, I was always, putting, oh, you didn't draw that with a fountain pen. So I was like, okay, here. And I would always put the thing. So now it's just become, let's go ahead and just show the utensil that I drew with me. And a lot of times it actually shows the scale of this little sketch.
Right.
There's a lot of people, somebody was trying to question. It's I guess it's kind of weird to me to actually like be confronted with people. There's no way that that's a sketch on a Post-it note. And so I guess in a way I kind of purposely get the, almost the edge to edge, if it's not like the full, Post-it note, at least a portion of the Post-it note in there so that you can see it with the scale of the nib of a, 0.005 micron, which is my tool of choice. So I just sit there and I put it on there to kind of show everybody that, hey, it really is this small of a sketch. And, it's just kind of something fun and something for me to kind of take a mental break from the day. Because obviously we all know that, there are some times where, we get the crazy phone calls from contractors or clients or, from somewhere else. And, it's just, we can have a stressful life. And, one thing that I enjoy is sketching and drawing. So I use this as a way to just kind of, detach a little bit, draw a little bit, and then get back to reality after I'm done.
Well, until next time.
Thank you guys, and thanks for listening to me babble on about sketching.
Yeah.
No, it's great. It's great.
All right, see you next time.
All right, bye-bye.